let's look at how all of these teams have grown up, right? Because we have, let's start with the NFC. We have the San Francisco 49ers traveling to Philadelphia to face the Eagles. Eagles, one of the more, I would say, impressive franchises over the past few years, despite having to stop and start with the quarterback and the head coach. The 49ers, though, a team, there's a lot of continuity there, right? Since 2017, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been the head coach, general manager duo. They traded a second round pick to your former team, the New England Patriots, for Jimmy Garoppolo to be their quarterback. He was able to guide them to 1 Super Bowl and 2 NFC championship games. But despite that, they traded 3 first-round picks to move up in the 2021 draft to select Trey Lance out of North Dakota State. That has so far not worked. But I think it speaks to the resiliency of the roster that they've built, that they continue to be in this position, right? Think about that. They trade a bunch of draft picks to move up and get Trey Lance. Since that trade, they've made 2 consecutive NFC championship games, and they've had 2 different starting quarterbacks in both games. Neither one of them is Trey Lance. And so you think about that, Thomas. Obviously a lot of that is Kyle Shanahan, a guy you work with closely in Atlanta as the offensive coordinator, who's a brilliant, I think, play caller and designer. Part of that is John Lynch, a guy who has, made the top draft picks he's had, other than Lance, count, and just kind of a very rock steady roster that I think is one of the pillars of the league.
Okay, so I'm going to provide a backdrop for everyone because many people probably aren't privy to some of this information. I think it'll be good. You lead in and you can tee me up a little bit more on this because I think it's really important to set the tone. You already talked about it. They have Kyle Shanahan, obviously, as the head coach, who's got roots from the bottom of his world, being with his dad and being genius-like at what he knows, and he does an unbelievable job with that. And then you have John Lynch, who is a Hall of Fame player, who, as everyone knows, comes into that fold with Kyle Shanahan to partner as a head coach and a GM. By the way, is vital to build a team. If you do not have an operational, communicative relationship, you have no chance whatsoever. Do not listen to anyone out there. And there's been a couple executives out there that say, no, man, I promote contentious relationships. Bullshit. You cannot function successfully without having that. These 2 men come together, really, really good knowledge in their worlds. I'm talking about Kyle and I'm talking about John Lynch. John Lynch comes over, remember, as a GM from the media. And I mentioned to John, we did a podcast about a year and a half ago, whenever it was. And I was saying to him, I said, do you understand that how many people in the scouting world, the management world were jealous and weren't really sure how they wanted things to work out with you? I said this to John. Think about that, everyone. When someone pops over from the media, albeit a Hall of Fame player, people are they just don't, in this world, they don't like that, right? They don't accept it because they feel like it tugs at the very fabric of what they've been doing for 15, 20, 30 years to get to a GM role. And John gets in and is successful. Pull aside maybe the lack of scouting on the road experience. He has the right people around him. Adam Peters, his assistant GM. He had Rand Carthon, who left, as you know, recently to go to Tennessee. Good, solid, surrounding people. Just so everyone knows, in the backdrop of this, they understand through and through the system that Kyle Shanahan wants. Kyle's very direct. Kyle's very knowledgeable. They come together and they learn their system together and they build together and they have visions together. And, again, with really, really good background football minds, and their egos aren't getting in the way because, quite honestly, let's call it the way it is. Kyle Shanahan could come in with a massive ego. So could John Lynch, but they both respect each other enough that they can really dig in on the building process, which is vital, which leads into what you're talking about. When you're putting the team together, you're deciding on the players, you're deciding on the format, you're deciding on how you're going to move through your trades. And you, as GM and head coach, these 2 guys have a strong vision together. And Bill Belichick always said this, and I might have said it before, and I hate to repeat myself, Thomas, this is when I first got the job. You know your team better than anyone. The media can pop off, the fan base can pop off, but you know it better than anyone. I'm talking about the head coach and the GM. If you are communicative enough with a common vision. All you up and coming executives, I'm telling you, get on the wavelength with your head coach, even if you're different personalities, working in the same direction, always communicating, being able to share. I'll leave it on this, and I'm going to toss it back to you. Being able to share and understand that candor is key. If you can't be candid with your partner in the whole thing, i.e., GM head coach, you have no chance of being successful. And so I just think they've done such a really good job. Big picture, I just wanted to share that where they are, where Kyle and John are.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing is there have been rocky roads, right? Like 2017, they only won one of their first like 10 or 11 games. They get Garoppolo, they win the first, they win the last 5 games of that season. But then 2018, he tears his ACL in week 3. They have another season where there wasn't much going for them. 2019 happens, and obviously they make a Super Bowl, but there was a come from behind win by Kansas City, another team that we'll talk about today. 2020 was another season with 10 or more losses, right, where Garoppolo gets hurt and things. And you look at Shanahan, his the 2 of their records, right, were not great the first like 3-4 years of the tenure. And in fact, even last year they started 3-5, if I'm not mistaken, before really growing up. And I think that continuity, that bandedness, banding together, and also the system they built. So you talk about Rand Carthon, like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was there. Parag Maratha, he's still there. A very and then you look at the coaching staff. Robert Saleh's a head coach. He was the defensive coordinator there. Now he goes, and not to say that Saleh didn't add value, but he goes. And D'Amico Ryans comes in, and it's seamless, more or less there. Mike McDaniel leaves. He goes and has a great coaching debut with the Dolphins, even though Tua was hurt. And, their offense still is humming. And you look and you say, okay, this is an organism where, branches get cut off and they produce fruit somewhere else. And the thing still builds. And I think that there's an element there where, you really have, a great football team, and you look and they've taken advantage of all the seasons that they've gone through, right? So 2018 happens and they struggle. Their quarterback gets hurt. Well, what was interesting was they structured Jimmy Garoppolo's contract so that was the biggest cap hit that they were going to have while he was their quarterback. And so then he comes back. They get the 2nd overall pick because of the struggles of the 2018 team. They get Nick Bosa, premium position player. Now he's basically the favorite to be defensive player of the year. So like every single season of their life, right, with the ups, they've been able to obviously capitalize and make the NFC title game every one of their good years. And then the downs, they go ahead and get players like Mike McGlinchey and Nick Bosa, guys that are bedrock members of their team. And they, Joe Staley retires. They go get Trent Williams. Like this is a team where, they just kind of reinforce it. And the biggest edge that they have, and I want to turn this over to you because you have a similar experience. The biggest edge that they have is really their quarterback is their coach, which, he's the mind. He's the guy that pushes that whole offense. And a lot of it is similar to your experience in that he grew up in football, right? His dad, Mike, was, the head coach of the Raiders and then the head coach of the Broncos and the offensive coordinator the last time the Niners won a Super Bowl back in 1994. And you think about, you similarly grew up in football. It sort of was your lifeblood. And like you as you get older and you start to be able to run things yourself, there's aspects of how you've seen it run before. And that can be, as somebody who wasn't, like I played football growing up, but like my family's not a football family. Like what are the advantages you get if you're somebody like Shanahan in that realm?
Well, I could speak to it from the standpoint of when I got that GM job. One of my pitch points to Arthur Blank at the time is I've literally done every role in an organization, from, again, picking up sweats and jocks and whatever else I did, and tape, working in all rooms, doing whatever needed to be done to see how the organization was running. And I take a lot of pride in that. I mean, even back to those days when people were talking about me cutting the grass, because I literally did work on the grounds crew with the Browns. I think bigger picture, that is a really, really important thing. You go back to Kyle Shanahan. Not only was he in rooms with his father, who was genius, like in his own right, of course, right? Yep. I mean, one of the very best. And he was able to watch him. He was able to watch how he functioned. He was able to watch how he put game plans together. So when I personally was working with Kyle Shanahan, when he was with us at the Falcons, he had such a well-rounded view of a football team. Remember, he was going through a little bit of a time there, whether he was going to get his opportunity to be an HC or not, right? He had a couple. He was at loggerheads with a couple former assistant GMs, I believe, that were there. We won't get into that whole banter, but he came out of that from our place, I feel, in a really good space. And what I noticed, this is really interesting because I felt it in my own way, and I say this completely humbly. He comes out of it as a coordinator into a head job, and it's like the head job was even that much better for him because he didn't have to worry about all the other stuff. He was made to be a head coach. When you're coming up and you're sort of stifled a little bit, and there's another step there, you get distracted, you get edgy, you might want to argue with people. I think he's in his own world in a good place right now because he knows he's the one that's calling the shots, of course, along with John. But a really, really important thing for him. And I will say, I just continue to be impressed. And then look, bring it back to 16 when he was our O coordinator. That was a really, really tough run, kick, banter forever. I mean, that's not easy to get over that. That cat stood up. We talked about it with another situation we were talking about recently about another thing close to us. When someone gets drilled, and that they come out on the other side, standing up tall, understanding that that's what they have to be, resilient. And I think he's done a great job with that. And now, anytime anyone wants to throw darts, they can even throw some darts at him over the last few years they got in the playoffs, right? Why they came up short. But you know what? He has a lot of confidence. I want to finish with this. Of course, a ton of confidence. And he's got resiliency about him. I love that about him. I think personality-wise, and remember this, take it to wherever you want to take it. All of us in our own ways, some have had much more successful fathers in football, and others have been in football coaches, sons of football coaches, and sons of personnel people. There's this bond that you have. And at the core, at the very core, when you're around it like at a serious level and you know it inside out, you really will go toe-to-toe with anyone as far as being the domain expert. So a little aside, when you don't get the domain expert appreciation, you get a little bit edgy. Like, why are you not tapping into that? That's as a GM, that's as a coach. And quite honestly, it's from a business perspective.
Right.
It's really
when I was an academic, I got that a lot when, I did consulting in biology and marketing and everything. And absolutely, you learn over time that those people, you have to let them talk first. And that is a hard lesson to learn, but you learn it obviously, in the school of hard knocks, right? Which football, I think, is the school of hard knocks more than anything. I think that, you bring up, and what's cool, and before we move on to the Eagles here, Mike Shanahan, he got probably a head coaching job too early and struggled with the Los Angeles Raiders. This is how long ago, Los Angeles Raiders. And, things didn't work out the best. Then he goes, and much like his son, he was an offensive coordinator for one of the best teams to ever play, right? The 94 Niners, Steve Young, Ricky Waters, Jerry Rice on the other side. And they were amazing. And to your point, like that was the right kind of like, okay, now I'm ready. Goes to Denver, and Denver's immediately good, right? Denver's immediately good. They go win 2 Super Bowls. So he gets his day in the sun, and your son's watching all of the nooks and crannies of what can happen as that coach. Failure, success, and then back with Denver again. You're going to Super Bowl, or you're going to AFC title games with Jake Plummer, who's now selling mushrooms in Colorado. Then you have you see it all, right? And so everybody's like, well, how is Kyle Shanahan going to respond to having Brock Purdy, a 7th round pick, as his quarterback? It's like he's seen it all. Like we know what's going to happen here, and so I think that and as somebody who doesn't have that background, I admire being able to be up and close to seeing all those things, because I think your resolve when you go through adversity, and this Niners team has gone through adversity. They've had 3 great years with these two, and they've had 3 not so great years with these two, and they come out of the wash, and I think that they're not favored. They have the lowest odds to win the Super Bowl per the betting markets, but even I think that they're here to stay. I'll just say that.
to your point, and those are all really good points. Back to finish up with Kyle. I mean, personally, I think he's done one of the best jobs that this is quintessential, Kyle Shanahan, right? Put a quarterback in there, see what he sees, put him in the right spot, everything that goes on. I just think it's been a marvelous job that he's done that way. And I will say this is for bulletin board material, Sumer Sports. You make sure you put this out on YouTube. I believe that Kyle Shanahan, as he's evolving as a head coach, is one of those head coaches that you seriously have to look at if you were another organization to trade for him as your head coach.
Make the Niners turn down 2 first-round picks. That's all I say. Make the other GM make a tough decision to keep him.